Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Russian President Vladimir Putin is preparing to reject a US proposal for a truce in Ukraine. Now, this comes after President Putin said that he agreed in principle with a US-backed proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. But the Ukrainian leader says Putin's statements fits a familiar pattern of manipulation.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy thinks he can see right through Vladimir Putin.
Putin often acts this way. He doesn't say no outright, but ensures that everything drags on and that normal solutions become impossible.
Zelenskyy called Putin's response to the ceasefire plan manipulative and suggested Putin was hiding his true intentions.
Putin is afraid to tell President Trump directly that he wants to continue this war, that he wants to kill Ukrainians.
The Russian president had signalled his agreement to the plan at a meeting in Moscow with his Belarusian counterpart, Alexander Lukashenko.
We agree with the proposals to cease hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that this cessation should be such that it would lead to long-term peace and eliminate the initial causes of this crisis.
Putin says Ukraine only wants a ceasefire because it's losing on the battlefield and will use it to rearm. One recent development is in Russia's favour. It says it's recaptured the key town of Sudzha in its own Kursk region, which would take away one of Ukraine's bargaining chips. Ukraine accepted a US proposal for a 30-day ceasefire after talks in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. The US says the ball is in Putin's court.
He put out a very promising statement, but it wasn't complete. And yeah, I'd love to meet with him or talk to him. We know where we are with Ukraine, and we are getting good signals outside of Russia as to where we are with Russia. And hopefully they'll do the right thing.
Trump has been pushing for a quick end to the war, which is now into its fourth year.
Let's get more on this from our correspondent, Grigos Simonovsky. He joins us from Riga, from where DW has been operating since Russian authorities closed down our Moscow bureau. Welcome. President Putin's response to the idea of a 30-day ceasefire deal is yes, but. Run us through his concerns.
Well, Phil, the list of reservations is quite long, with main issues being, first of all, the situation in the Kursk region. The Russian region is still partially occupied by the Ukrainian forces. Vladimir Putin suggested that Ukrainian soldiers should surrender there, and he said that his decision regarding the ceasefire will really depend on Russian success there in Kursk. Now, then another issue was mobilization and rearmament of Ukraine during the possible ceasefire. He would like to prevent Ukraine from being able to mobilize new soldiers or receive arms from abroad over this period. And finally, he also said that any ceasefire really must lead to a long-term settlement, to a long-lasting peace, in his words. And I think that this suggests that he really wants to talk to the Americans directly about his long-term goals in Ukraine. We know they are annexation of Ukrainian regions and keeping Ukraine out of NATO, preserving Ukraine's status as a neutral state.
OK. And can these questions be realistically addressed? Because we've heard from President Zelenskyy and other commentators who say this is a Russian tactic. They say yes, and then they produce a number of questions and issues that just drags the matter on, which ultimately leads to a no. So can these questions be sensibly addressed?
Well, this answer yesterday really shows that Russia is not in a hurry to commit to anything. And this is consistent with other signals we've been hearing from the Kremlin. Just yesterday, a senior Kremlin aide to Vladimir Putin said that the ceasefire proposal in its current shape and form does not give Russia anything. So I think that bringing up the situation in Kursk region really shows that this is the priority for the Kremlin now. They wouldn't they seem unwilling to commit to anything before pushing Ukrainians out of their own territory, and other points could also be a tough sell with the Ukrainians. So indeed, it's conceivable that this could be a negotiating tactics. Russia setting the asking price so high that it is dragging the negotiations out in order to get out of them as much as possible.
So if Russia tries to drag this out, we heard President Trump there saying that he wants this solved quickly. We've seen lots of pressure the US apply to get Ukraine to the table. What pressure is Washington likely to apply to Moscow?
I think the biggest factor that is still there in these conversations is Donald Trump himself. Vladimir Putin yesterday publicly thanked Donald Trump personally for his involvement in these talks. And I think that this shows that Vladimir Putin really wants to play nice with Donald Trump in order to stay in his grace for the long run. But on the other hand, we've also seen the Trump administration toughening some sanctions on Russian oil and gas sector last night. So this is a signal that there is no endless patience, and the Trump administration also wants to show that they have some stick that they could use in order to convince the Russians to move on the issue of the ceasefire.
OK, thanks for that, Grigos. Grigos Simonovsky in Riga. All right, straight to our correspondent Max Zander in the Ukrainian capital. Welcome, Max. So President Trump says he's seen good signals coming from Russia. President Zelenskyy doesn't seem to see it the same way.
That's right, Phil. President Zelenskyy seems to think the exact opposite. He has made a recent statement in which he said that Russia essentially cannot be trusted in these negotiations. He indicated that the silence of Russia after news broke of a conditionless immediate ceasefire agreement being reached between the Ukrainians and the Americans. After that went public, that there was nothing to be heard from Russia, and him and others in the Ukrainian leadership have indicated that this is, part of a Russian manipulation tactic. The Russians are stating that publicly that they want peace, yes, but under certain conditions that the Ukrainians cannot possibly accept. The Ukrainians also have said that the Russians are very tough negotiators. They have been negotiating with them prior to the full-scale invasion over the fighting in the east. They have seen similar tactics here. They're already, they say. So the situation does not seem like a very positive signal here on the Ukrainian side. And while talks are ongoing in Moscow there, while negotiations are trying to go one step further, the fighting continues with strong attacks on Ukrainian troops, strong fighting happening in the east, but also in the Russian Kursk Oblast.
Okay, so it sounds like President Zelenskyy thinks these Russian preconditions will actually make a ceasefire impossible.
I mean, that's right. I mean, part of the central demands that Putin mentioned there was that the Ukrainian military, in his words, would take the opportunity to regroup, resupply, bring in new weapons, bring in new Western weapons, and that would be to the detriment of the Russian military. On the other side, the Ukrainians have to worry about the exact same thing being done by Russia. That's why over the first couple of years of the war, this was also brought up every once and again that perhaps negotiations or a ceasefire would not be the best way forward, because Russia could do exactly that. So what President Putin wants is essentially weakening the Ukrainian military during this ceasefire by being able to resupply his own troops, something that would not be in favor of the already struggling Ukrainian military. And in addition to that, as we heard, President Putin mentioned that for a lasting peace, root causes needed to be addressed. And root causes of why the Russians are here, of why they attacked Ukraine, of what they are actually trying to achieve here. If you go into that, there is a lot there to be discussed, and this is nothing that can be dealt with in a short period of time, most likely.
Okay, thank you for that, Max. Max Zander in Kyiv.